Your Eminence, dear brothers in Christ, fathers, brothers and sisters, I'm very honored to be here on this stage. Don't exactly know what the Samovar is here for, but I was asked to speak a little bit about certain subjects, and to this great sea of wonderful stories that we just heard from Vladimir Krasovsky, I'd kind of add a couple of drops, I think, yeah? And what I want to share with you is that my mother was personal friends with St. John when he was in Serbia. The families were acquaintances, and my mother knew St. John before he was a monk. He sold newspapers there in Belgrade, and the families would meet at different times. And the account that my mother shared with me was that one time she was on a tram, and St. John was there, and he kind of nervously told her that some kind of mistake had taken place in the ecclesiastical offices and that he was being called in. And later he met her again, and he said, it's worse than that. They're going to be consecrating me a bishop. I had said this story one time before a group of young people, and a young lady said, "Excuse me, Father, this happened with my grandmother." And I genuinely was confused because my mother told me this story that it was directly with her. But in the end, it turned out that my mother and this grandmother were great friends, and they could have been together at the time when the conversation took. So because I actually stopped saying the story for a while. I was a little bit confused, but I did find out, I did a little research, and I did find out that both my mother and the grandmother, because the lady was a young lady, her grandmother was the same age as my mom. And one time in the sepulchre with St. John, we came down. That was when the people would ask for panihida services at his sepulchre. And my mother said, I truly believe that St. John is a saint, that John Maximovich is a saint. But he was my friend, and she told me these stories. And she said one incident happened. My mother was very, very close to the church. She read in church on Kliras when Metropolitan Anthony was at services in the Belgrade church, the Russian church there. And my grandmother read and sang, and my great-grandmother read and sang in the church there. But my mother didn't sing. She had a hearing problem, so she was only able to read and not sing. By the way, at the same time, the future Archbishop Pavlenko of the Holy Trinity Monastery was a young hieromonk, and he served in the church there. And he also had a hearing problem. So when my mother was reading, she would stick her head into the altar and shake her head like this, that she was finished reading. He would do his Vozglas and also shake his head, so she would know that this is shouldn't laugh at people with hearing problems. So this is the truth about that. So we're there in the sepulchre, and my mother says that she was at an event like this where people were volunteering to do the tea and everything. And in the presence of Metropolitan Anthony, people would come up to him to receive a blessing. And at that same event, there was a priest. And Father Peter has asked me a number of times if I could remember the name of this priest. I don't know who he was. He was from the married priest. He was a widower. And as people came up to receive a blessing, he would make a comment to my mother about each person that came up. And one person came up and he said to my mom, he said, "Look at him. He is the bearer of the Jesus prayer. He has the Jesus prayer in his heart. And this was the future Bishop Nikan. At that time, he was a layman. And this was Vladika Nikan. And if you've ever heard him saying any sermons, he would always say them with such deep spiritual emotion. And you knew he was always prayerful. Another gentleman came up. He was also a layman. And the priest said to my mother, the Russian church will suffer very much from this man. I'm not going to disclose who he is, but in our own time, this person did cause very, very difficult times for the church abroad. And then the future St. John came, well, St. John, he was St. John then. The future Bishop John came up, and the priest said to my mother, he said, with his relics, Russian people will be returning to their homeland. My mother said this way, way, way before the glorification of St. John. Years passed, and I was chosen to be among the people who went with Bishop Metropolitan Laris to Russia when he went first time officially. He had gone incognito a couple of times, but officially came with a delegation. And the delegation also had a group attached to it that were considered pilgrims. They weren't official members of the delegation, but they were there. I was one of those pilgrims. And our Vladimir Krasovsky had painted, how many, I don't know, 28 icons of St. John?
I don't remember.
What?
11. Lost count.
No, it was more than 11. It might have been 24 or something. Anyway, many icons of St. John with his relics. And here I am standing there watching Metropolitan Laver give an icon to a church. And I came up to him and I said, Vladika, my mother said this. She said this to me, that the priest told her way back when Metropolitan Anthony was still alive, that the Russian people would be returning to Russia with the relics of St. John. And Vladika Laver said to me, say this to everybody. And I had to speak out and tell the group of people that were there about the thing that my mother had said. But my mother, she was friends with, as I said, with St. John. Their relationship was so that Vladika John had a nickname for my mom. I'm going to say it in Russian. I don't know exactly how to translate it. Vladika John called my mom, at that time she was a young lady, an older teenager, I guess, if you check the dates. He called her Durachka, which probably the best way to say it is silly girl, I guess. But my mom called Vladika John Vladichka. Later I knew that some of the children that were in the priut, in the orphanage in China, they also called St. John Vladichka. But my mom told me that was the thing with them. Maybe it was because my mom was very, very close to future bishops. There was a picture of the brothers Bartoshevich. They were in one of the pictures, and they both became bishops. I believe they were in Geneva, Switzerland, one after the other. But they were young students, and they passed their time by going from one monastery to another, and they would have like their walking sticks, and they'd walk from one place to another. And my mother was with them, and they would philosophize and theologize. And my mother at the time was very, very interested in Vladimir. It's just flew out of my head. What's his name? Shah? No, the other one. Solovyov. So she was defending Solovyov, and the brothers were getting more and more irritated at her. And actually, one of the brothers flung his walking stick at her. Maybe that's why Vladika John called Durachka. I don't know. Anyway, jumping forward already, Archbishop Anthony called the group of priests to be witnesses at the time that the sepulcher was being opened before the glorification. And I think it was Protodziakan Nikolai and Vladimir Krasovsky and Isabel Pochestvo, the person who took care of the sepulcher. Trajan, Mr. Trajan. And they went and they actually lifted the lid of the sepulcher and looked to see that it was possible to open it when all the clergy was together. All of us who were present, we had our own private prayers or whatever. Some of them went to confession and communion, but we were there. It was like the services just before Pascha, Great and Holy Sabbath, Saturday, that kind of atmosphere, pre-Pascha atmosphere. And we were there when the sepulcher was open and the metal casket was lifted, and it had rust on both sides. So it looked like the bottom might be too weak to just be lifted on two beams the way it was set up. So Archbishop Anthony said that we should lift the casket up and see what the condition of the bottom of the casket was. And so it was lifted and put down, and then Vladika said, well, what's the condition of the bottom of the casket? And nobody had looked. Everybody was so humble that they just went like this, and they went down. And Vladika goes, you didn't look? And maybe it was Vladimir Krasovsky, because he was always like that. Said, well, Vladika, you didn't look either. And it was a humbling moment, and yet it was kind of funny. Another thing at that time was when they decided to actually open the casket. The little screws were, what are they called? The ones that have the little cross, not irregular screwdriver, the other one? Well, everybody had somebody brought a little hammer, somebody brought a screwdriver, somebody brought something, excuse me, and nobody brought a Phillips screwdriver. And I think it was Atец Alexei Kotar who went home quickly to run back and bring a Phillips screwdriver. But by then, Atец Nikolai Porshnikov, and everybody knows it's a hefty and strong guy, I think he took a crowbar and he just went, and, one moment. Before that, the casket was like locked, and the future Vladika Pyotr, Paul Lukyanov, he had in his pocket the key, and he got a blessing from Archbishop Anthony to try to open it with the key. The key didn't work. They decided to unscrew it. There wasn't a Phillips screwdriver. And then Father Nicholas just went crunch, and the casket was open, and we saw the holy relics of St. John for the first time. And as you know, when a priest or a bishop dies, his face is covered with the air that is usually over the chalice. And with everything that was done, each moment was with a prayer. We opened the sepulcher, we lifted the casket, we did, and there was Archbishop Anthony would start to sing a prayer, and everybody would go on with him praying it. And so Vladika Anthony picked up the air, and we could see that everything was preserved, and it seemed like everything except for St. John's nose, because everything was kind of white, and his nose, the area of his nose was like black. So that was a moment. But later, when the holy relics were washed and all this white came off, you could see that the reason why this was dark was because the air was there like this. And I asked our local funeral director, I said, what was the white What was the white all over the skin? And it turned out that if a body is decomposing, this white stuff would have destroyed the body. But it didn't. It didn't. And also, if whoever's there remembers that there was a kind of a damp smell, not a bad smell, but just a smell of dampness. So all of the factors that would make a normal body of a person who has died to corrupt was there, but none of that corruption took place. We have the relics in the church now. So those are the things that were very, very moving, to know that it wasn't embalming, it wasn't that the casket was hermetically preserved, like you can suck all the air out of something and it can be exist for a very, very long time. All of the factors for corruption were there, and no corruption took place. That's a great, great miracle. There was a few other things I could say, but we're talking about also the life in Holy Trinity Monastery when I was there. And I had just very recently, when the book came out here, the book that's called как по-английски, это святые, не святые, saints? Everyday saints. Everyday saints. Well, there were everyday saints. When I was reading the book, I could see, oh my goodness, this is just like Father Pimen in Holy Trinity Monastery. Oh, this is exactly like Father Vladimir in the monastery. This is like somebody else. And so those are the people that we were very, I don't want to use the word lucky, we were very, very blessed to meet and know. And I had witnessed an incident that touched my heart for the rest of my life. And that was that I was a summer boy. I think maybe I was 10, maybe even 11 years old. And I was in the monastery kitchen, and two monks came in who were arguing amongst themselves. They were arguing, and I kind of was standing on the side. And then all of a sudden they started to go speaking very, very loudly, and then things came over to being fisticuffs, if you know. Start shoving and hitting. A couple of the pots fell down, and I pushed myself up against the wall to protect myself from falling pots. And another monk came in. The monk was Father Serge Romberg. It was one of the very, very sober and very, very quiet monks, but always ready to say something and observe. And he just came up and he took them by the hand and said, "We're not going to be doing this. Мы так не будем делать." And he stopped them. And of course, afterwards, it turned out that at the evening meal, they were standing up because they were sort of like monastically punished. They were standing there, and at the very end of the trapeza, Archbishop Pavlenko said that the monastic rule is that everyone asks forgiveness of each other every evening, and he directed the monks to do that. And both of them fell, it's very hard to remember and say this, both of them fell down on the ground, just like when you read about saints and stories about the desert fathers. They fell on the ground, and both of them would just say, "Forgive me, forgive me, forgive me," and they wouldn't get up. And finally, they stood up, they hugged, and for the rest of the time that I knew them, they were always very, very brotherly to each other. And each of those monks had their own specific strong points in their life. One was Father Nicodemus, who was the monastery baker, and he was found, he died on post. He was the machine that makes the dough in the monastery was working, and they came in and found him with his apron and flour on him. He died в своем послушании. That was like really a high spiritual point for this person. And the other one was Father Guri. And Father Guri, I witnessed this. He kept the strict fast. We're fasting now in the 40 days. For 40 days, Father Guri did not eat any solid food. I think the only thing that was his sustenance was drinking warm water with lemon and honey for 40 days. And I saw him come out of his kelya after he did that. So those are some of the people. One of the people that I remember very well is Father Iov, Matushka Ilyana Perikrostov's uncle. And he was always at all of the services. And one time, another seminarian and I, we were kind of very, very late out from the monastery, and we came back at the very time when nocturne service starts, Polunashnica, and we put our caskets on and started going into the cathedral, and Father Iov met us and he said, "Oh, out all night, were you boys?" So those are the kind of people that I met. Father Kiprian was there. He taught us strictly, and I came to California because Father Kiprian chose me one time to come, and that's my California life started here. Anybody have any questions? I'm better at answering questions.
Fishing.
Oh, yes, he fished a lot, and he brought the fish for the brothers to eat in the monastery. The story with the Tetziev that I witnessed was that you have to know the way that the monastery was built. There was the church and the monastery brotherhood building, and then there was a farther, like a farmhouse building where some of the monks lived. And Father Iov was in front of that building, and from his point of view, he could see a field way out, away, and the wagon was falling over because of the way that the hay bales was put on it, and he could see that it was going to fall on somebody. And although Father Iov had a quiet voice and he served very quietly, all of a sudden he shouted so loud that in a field far away, the people were there. They were able to notice and get out of the way of the falling bales. So those are, I could go on about little trivial things, but each one of them is like a little golden drop that fills my heart in remembrance of the people. Another person, and not a monk, a lay person, this is important too, was Nikolai Nikolaevich Alexandrov, who was the dean. He was the original dean of the Holy Trinity Seminary, and he was able to get Holy Trinity Seminary to be accredited at the time, and he made it part of New York State University. So seminarians who got their diploma would get a diploma from New York State University, Holy Trinity Seminary, New York State University. And some people very unjustly considered that Nikolai Nikolaevich Alexandrov had some kind of ties with Masonic organizations or something like that, and he had to suffer being accused like that. And one time I was sitting with him after he stayed in the trapeza, because in his old age he took a lot longer to eat his food. So I came in late, he was staying late, I sat next to him, and all of a sudden he said, "You know, Brother Stefan, people accuse me of having been a traitor to my faith, and that I was even a Mason or something." And I looked at him and I was shocked, and I said, Nikolai Nikolaevich, why do you say that? He said, well, people say that, but there'll be proof that I never denied the Lord. And I was confused why he was talking to me about that. He said, it'll soon be proved. And then all of a sudden he said, and when I'm buried, when it's my funeral service, please have the choir sing Тебе Бога хвалит. How's that in English? The Te Deum. The Te Deum, the big St. Ambrose Te Deum. What's that? No. And I was a little confused. I was just a student, and he's telling me these things. And lo and behold, not long after that conversation, it was the eve of Great and Holy Sabbath Saturday, and I was standing holding the Ripiede over the epitaphium, the Pleshtinitsa, and somebody came up to me and said, Nikolai Nikolaevich just passed away in his kelya, in his room. So he got a paschal burial, because they buried him on right Paschal Monday. And as the funeral was going, I remembered what he said to me. He said, I would ask the choir to sing Тебе Бога хвалим. And I thought, well, I better tell somebody about it. And I went up to Father Sergei, the one that I mentioned earlier. He was the monastery econom. He took care of ordering all the things that the monastery needed. And I came up to him and I said, Father Serge, this thing happened to me. I had a conversation with Nikolai Nikolaevich, and at that time, he asked to have the choir sing the hymn. And Father Serge and I came over to Father Ignazi, the choir director at the time, and he conveyed to him this request, and all of a sudden, just like as if it was a normal thing, they decided to sing, and they sang at the end of his funeral, they sang Тебе Бога хвалим, and then after that, of course, he was carried on the shoulders of the seminarians to the cemetery on the hill where he was buried. So it was kind of like not just a little proof, but a gigantic stamp of approval from heaven that this man was dedicated to the church in his whole life. I think I've talked a lot. Unless anybody said, yes? Oh, yes. Father Innocenzi was a hierodeacon, and he was also the monk that took care of the apiary. Everybody knows what an apiary is, right? No apes in an apiary. Apiary is where the bees are, at the pasika in Russian, pasika. He took care of all that. And he was a really wonderful and supportive monk. If you had any kind of problem or anything, you could come and chat with him, and he would always have a nice story to tell, especially his stories of hunting tigers in Siberia. And he would say, you don't hunt tigers, they hunt you, and you have to catch it before he catches you. Is that what you wanted me to say? Yeah. All kinds of things. Yes. So please forgive me. I've talked a lot.
Would you like to say anything more? We can show the film?
No, show the film. Show the film. I'll release everybody from my...